Hey team, Richard Tubb here with another episode of Tubb Talk, the podcast for managed service providers. Now, as a former MSP, I understand all too well the challenges of billing. Don't groan too much. We've got too many vendors, too many bills, which often leads to lost revenue. So today I'm here with Ben Rogers from Cloud Billing. Now, Cloud Billing offers a solution that helps MSPs to automate their billing processes quickly, accurately, and comprehensively. So I think it's going to make for very interesting listening for MSPs. Ben, welcome to Tubb Talk.
Hey, Richards. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
My pleasure. Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation. Billing doesn't sound an exciting topic, but goodness me, I know from experience, it can be a real pain in the backside for MSPs. So I'm hoping you've got some insights. But where are you joining us from today?
Joining you from the Netherlands. I'm in our office in a city called Naarden, just outside of Amsterdam.
Oh, wonderful. Love Amsterdam. So I'm just across the water in Newcastle upon Tyne. I can just about wave to you. You might be able to see me.
I think I can see you out the window just over there. Yeah.
So tell us about Cloud Billing. How do you help managed service providers with their billing?
Yeah, so just a quick background. We were founded around 12 years ago, mainly focused at the beginning on the Benelux region. So we saw the opportunity even 14, 12 years ago of the challenges, let's say, that MSPs had in relation to their billing. And that was even before the cloud boom that we see today, which is still scaling and continuing year over year. And a lot of the problems that MSPs had back then are still some of the problems that they have now. A lot of manual process, a lot of data struggles with consolidation of data, effectively. Data's living in different silos. And cloud billing effectively takes the complexity out of the billing run every month and tries to the best of our ability with working with the MSP to bring all of that data into one place, and then also be able to use our insights in our platform on top of the billing as well. So I guess if we could get someone to think differently about billing after this conversation, Richard, that would be great, because it's often seen as that mundane task. And let's be honest, it is a mundane task, but at the same time, it's your cash flow. It's your guaranteed touch point with the customer, with your customer. It's going to happen every month.
Yeah,
I get it for most MSPs, and it's important to get it right. But it's also about getting MSPs to operate in a more efficient way as well. And we can talk a bit about that later, the automation that we do and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking back, I alluded to the fact when I was an MSP, I remember the pain of billing. However, I sold my MSP business 13 odd years ago, and it was, even back then, it was a different world. You alluded to the fact that like a modern managed service provider, IT solution provider, they've got multiple vendor partners. They've got multiple cloud services probably that they resell, dozens of different license types. And sometimes it occurs that there's going to be multiple distributors to deal with too. So that is a lot. I think anybody listening who runs an MSP is going to be nodding their head, understand. So it's really understandable that billing is a headache. So let's deep dive a little bit on cloud billing. How does it help the modern MSP with so many different places to spin?
Yeah, so you made a good point there. Effectively, MSPs are dealing with the complexity of the service offerings that they have, and that's continuing year over year. So it's about what we can do is we're able to apply pricing rules. We're able to automate part of the billing, most of the billing run, 99%, let's say, of the billing run. It's a good point to make would be that MSPs, I would argue, don't necessarily have a billing problem. They actually have a data problem. Okay. So what we try to do with our current customers and maybe future customers is we sit down with them at the beginning and we try to spot where the gaps are in the processes. So billing is obviously, I guess, the financial side of the business and the invoicing, but it affects a lot of different departments, operations, IT, they're all involved. So we try to get the teams together, see how the process is, how do you consolidate your data, how are you running your invoicing. So we treat it as a project, and we're brought on nearly like a partner versus than just a vendor. We're not a solution that you sign up for and you press a button and we're gone. We're working continuously with you. The MSP world and also just the IT world in general, even outside of the MSP world, is just constantly changing. And with that, your business as an MSP is just constantly evolving. So you need to adapt, you need to do things in different ways. And you need solutions that can scale with you, whether that's cloud billing as a billing solution or it's another part of the business. It's about finding again, partners versus vendors that can help scale your business. And I
Yeah.
think one other point to note, Richard, on cloud billing, outside of just the solution that we offer, it's also the expertise that we have. So we understand the business model of an MSP. Our customer base is made up of 99% of is MSPs. So we understand also what happens, what can go wrong, and what to do when it goes wrong, which is the thing that you don't know what to do until it happens, until yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you talk about, rather than being seen as just like a supplier, a software vendor, that you look at forging a partnership there. So I've spoken to so many, partners like yourself on this podcast. That seems to be the way the future is going for managed service providers. They're not looking to just somebody to sell them a product. They actually want a partnership to help them out. So really interesting that you've already taken a deeper dive into the billing challenges that managed service providers can have. So let me ask a little bit more about cloud billing as a company. So you're an Irishman living across there in Amsterdam, yes. And you said the business originally focused on the Benelux, but which geographies are you covering now, and what type of MSPs are you working with?
Good question. So I joined the company last year, and as part of me joining, a couple of people were brought on to lead the expansion into the UK. So that's UK and Ireland. So that's effectively why I joined the company. So we're expanding. We have UK customers. So mainly we're focused, to answer your question, on UK, Ireland, and Benelux. Mm-hmm. We are starting to branch out into other areas and looking into DACH, and the Spanish markets as well look quite interesting. I also see there's a lot of events there, so it's only going to increase the amount of MSPs. But I think from a market maturity point of view, the UK is usually first, and then Netherlands is. So we've done it slightly different way because we're a Dutch company. But what's interesting is the challenges that the MSPs go through in the Benelux, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg are the exact same challenges that are in the UK. I think the biggest difference between the markets would be the size of the UK market is larger. So you have more MSPs working with distributors, like you mentioned at the beginning of this. But again, it's not so different. They speak a different language and it's a different culture. But that's been ongoing for the last year. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name customers on this podcast, Richard, but
if they're comfortable with it, we're comfortable to hear it. But feel free to anonymize it if you want to talk about, the type of MSPs rather than the names.
Yeah, so we work with a variety of different MSPs. I would say billing really becomes a challenge for MSPs when they hit a certain revenue threshold. Yeah. Which can vary. Let's say 600K per year and up is when it really starts to become a challenge, and MSPs need to start looking into automation because the manual process it won't cut it anymore. Yeah. So it's around, I would say, that threshold. The more complexity as well. So you could be a smaller MSP, but you might have a lot of complexity. You might offer a lot of different services. You might operate on different clouds. You might have just complex pricing models. Maybe you need to add managed services, professional services on top of that. Our name is cloud billing. So we obviously focus on cloud services, but we could invoice anything effectively.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And the scope of the problem, not to underestimate it. So I don't do coaching with managed service providers to speak of anymore. But when I did, over the past few years, nearly every MSP I spoke to has this challenge. And often, Ben, I don't know if this bears out your sort of experiences with MSPs as well. They don't realize they've got the problem until they actually look into it and realize how much leakage there is of revenue and things. Yeah.
Yes. And that goes back to generally it's the data side. So you're working as the MSP on average with 20 different suppliers, plus 20 plus different suppliers, all with different products, all with different services that you're providing to your end customer. And you need already, even just thinking about that's a lot of work for someone to do. And then add in the facts that just everything is becoming more complex in the cloud world. I'm a salesperson myself, so I'm going to point the finger at other salespeople in our industry. We like to make things difficult for the people that are running the invoicing in the company. So I've seen MSPs that have 15 different names for the same product because the sales teams, and I'm not bashing, as I said, I'm a salesperson, but they'll create different names. That adds complexity. So I think that's also a good starting point to why automation can also be valuable for an MSP, because it forces you to standardize your offerings.
Mm.
And once you do that, you lay a foundation for being able to enrich your data that you have, being able to use the data to make better strategic decisions, ensuring your data is correct. Your billing data, at least for this conversation, let's say, but it could be relating to anything. Because if you want to tell a story in your MSP, you might want to tell different stories depending on who you're talking to with numbers. So finance will, if you're doing your numbers, you need to obviously do it in a certain way. If you're an MSP that's preparing for mergers and acquisitions, you need to be able to present your numbers in the right way, and you need to be confident in your numbers. And it would be, I try to ask MSPs that I speak with, are you confident in your numbers?
Mm-hmm.
And when your customer opens up a support ticket, which is another issue that can relate to billing, and they're asking, why does my invoice say this? Why did it say this last week? And then there's a chain, because maybe the processes aren't in place. There's a chain of communication that takes a long time. And then you get to the person that can answer the question. Maybe they don't know, or you don't have the trail of audibility that you need. So they're just some of the challenges, I guess, that we could touch on. We could probably talk all day about those challenges that the MSPs have.
And I'm happy to, and that's what we're here to do. I think the thing that I learned about billing as an MSP is that's where a lot of trust with your client can be, unfortunately, lost very, very easily. So as you allude to, if like a client gets a bill come through, and many clients do this, they'll go through the bill and make sure everything's accurate. If they find something that's not accurate, even if it's, an honest mistake on your part or just an oversight, it can undermine the confidence there that you have there. So let's not beat around the bush. I joked a little bit like billing doesn't seem such an exciting subject, but it's one of the fundamental things that big MSPs need to get absolutely right, because otherwise your clients are going to lose trust in you.
I agree. Billing is killing the MSP. And I'd be surprised if you can find an MSP that says everything is perfect and everything is working the way it needs to be. Do you know that meme where I think it's a dog or a cat is sitting in a house?
Yeah.
And there's fire all around and he says everything is fine, or this is fine.
This is fine.
That's unfortunately what it looks like in the business of an MSP. And it's not necessarily their fault. They don't realize the issue, like you said, until the cracks have opened up. And that's when you get your customer questions, and that's when you realize your processes are maybe not as efficient as they should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's unfortunately the way things are going, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it doesn't necessarily need to be with cloud billing. Again, it's not to, it could be, it's just getting you as the owner of the MSP or whoever you are in relation to an MSP, just to think a bit differently about billing. And also what we haven't touched on is also the data that you bring in can also help you spot upselling opportunities, for example, if it's correct. If you have it tied in, if you were an MSP owner, you mentioned, Richard, before, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you might notice that this would still have been the case. You've got a triangle. You've got your contracts, you've got your invoice, which often don't match month over month because you maybe you've given extra services or whatever it may be, and then you've got the source that you're getting the data from. They all say different things. And it's about being as transparent as possible. So if you're giving more offerings to your customer because you needed to add more servers or more managed services, you want to include that in the invoice. You want to show them, hey, we're giving you this service, even if you're not paying for it. It's also an upselling opportunity internally when you start to analyze those numbers.
Yeah, I was, forgive me for interrupting, I was with my good friend Andy Parks, who runs an MSP based in the Midlands here in the UK over the weekend. And years ago, I remember Andy showing me something that he did on his invoices, which was exactly what you said, which is they almost created a Chinese menu, Ben, where they said, like, here's the services you take, but here's the services you don't take. And that led to a lot of upselling opportunities for the MSP, because, if clients are aware of a service, They often want to take that service, not across
Yeah.
the board, but it gives them the opportunity to.
I think people are naturally scared of showing that transparency because they're afraid that their customer won't want to take this service, or they whatever. But that's not how your customer purchases things anymore. The market is ultra competitive, and yeah, it makes things difficult for the MSP.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the weeds a little bit here. Let's talk about integration. So we alluded to at the top of the call, you've got distributors, you've got vendors, you've got services, solutions, multiple different things going there. So integrations for cloud billing, what does that look like? What software accounting do you integrate with, which PSA tools and other tools within the managed service providers stack?
Yeah. So this depending on how the MSP is set up and their business model and how they want to run their billing. I'll just use an example. Let's just say a standard MSP. They'll use multiple different cloud services. Let's say whether they're indirect or direct, it doesn't really matter. If they're a direct partner with Microsoft, for example, we have direct connections built with all the major hyperscalers, where we can pull that data in. We can apply complex pricing rules and add your products and so on and so forth. We can also take data from other sources, so we can process data in lots of different ways. And it depends on the MSP. It depends what kind of data that they're billing for. So there's lots of different ways to pull that in. The indirect model versus the direct is slightly different. Both can be done. It's also dependent on the size of the MSP. The larger ones that are more complex tends to be direct partners. The smaller ones go through distributors, which face a lot of challenges because the distributors, and this isn't to bash the distributors, they're set up in a different way. So it can be challenging for them to get the right information into their systems. We can push the data to an ERP. We can also push the invoices out ourselves. We can, depending, usually an MSP will want to push finance data regardless to their ERP.
Yeah.
And then the contract data would come from PSAs. There's many different ones that we can work with.
Okay. Can you name some of the PSA tools that you work with at the moment? Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I believe we have some customers using Kaseya, and then Pax8 is more of a distributor. We've Ingram Micro. They're kind of more on the distributor side. They're the ones that I'll name. They're all on our website if anybody wants to have a look.
Well, we'll include in the show notes as well for anybody listening here, if you're interested in the integrations, because I know lots of MSPs listening will be like, okay, this sounds like an interesting product. Does it work with my existing stack? Well, I can tell you from looking at the Cloud Billing website, there is a lot of integrations on there already. So we'll include a link to that in the show notes that we put out there. So.
And it depends what you want to achieve with those integrations, because everyone has a different perception of integration. So it's yeah, there's a lot of custom built ones that we have as well for specifically for an MSP. The larger ones will often have their own maybe data warehouse, and we'd need to build connections to that. So there's a lot of nuances.
Definitely, yeah. It's not, as you said earlier, it's like not a one size fits all thing here. That's why you've got the partnership aspect of things as well.
And that's the danger of only talking about integrations, is that people have the perception, and this is the same for any billing tool, any tool in general, actually, Richard, is that the complex problems that these software tools solve are not done with one push of the button at the beginning. Obviously there's implementation for software, and it's about making sure the software that you deliver matches the needs of the MSP that you're dealing with, for example. And then in turn, the MSP needs to make sure their service offer is matching to their customer. So it never ends.
Never ends. Makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about something specific that we mentioned earlier, revenue leakage. It sounds nasty, and it is. I can tell you from experience. So what should MSPs listening to this show be aware of in terms of finding out whether they're losing money through poor billing practices? Yeah.
So the first thing to note is you're most likely working with a lot of different suppliers, like we mentioned. If that's done in a manual, if everything is done in a manual process, human error obviously can lead to revenue leakage. That would be the most obvious one.
Yeah.
I've worked with MSPs, and also even outside of the MSP world in a different line of work, where 3 billion plus euro pounds companies live in Excel. So there are many different people in your organization has access, let's say, to an Excel sheet, and finance are inputting data. The sales team that I mentioned like to make lots of different products for your services are putting something in, and then IT and operations also are involved in syncing the data to that. Even just that story in itself, there's a lot of room for error. I think you'd agree. The complex pricing rules as well, that on top of that. So if you have a lot of different services and you have different discounting models or just different costs of products and services across different customers, there's the chance that something is being missed. There's the chance that one of your customers, let's say, left, for example, and somebody forgot to switch the button off, and you're being charged by Microsoft for these services, and you only find out 3 to 4 months later.
Yeah, very common.
Because you don't. It actually leads back to visibility, I suppose. That you need to have. That's the most important. Do you have visibility as the MSP? That's the first question into these things. Can I see when my customers left that the connections are off, or are we bringing services into our systems and they're not being billed for whatever reason? There's some of the examples of revenue leakage, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's often in implementation that those would be found, because it's the core. So you need to get the foundation solid first, and that's where you spot a lot of the gaps, and then you can build on it from there.
So when I ran my MSP business, I remember billing being a colossal admin headache for me, Ben. We've talked a little bit about it, but we had lots of cross-checking. And even then, there was errors that either lost us money or, as we talked about, made us look bad in front of the client as we scrambled to sort those problems out. So obviously, you would hope MSPs listen to this and go, oh, we're going to go and check out cloud billing or a solution like that to make their life easier. But perhaps, an MSP who wants to say, well, I want to make sure I've got the fundamentals in place. How can MSPs make life easier for themselves?
Like I mentioned before, I would say the first thing to do would be to standardize your offerings, which will eventually lead to automation in some way or form, whether it's now or whether it's in a couple of years, doesn't really matter. Making sure your products are all sold in a similar way. Salespeople aren't using 15 different names for the same product. Identifying your data sources and where the challenges are when they're being brought in. Is there certain sources? I mean, every source is a different way of being processed generally for an MSP. Is there what's IT spending the most time on? And then on the financial side, making sure the process is well defined, that it's being followed in the right way to ensure that you're sending your invoices out on time. Mentioned the cross-checking. That's obviously, it's common sense, but it's very important. Make sure you don't take shortcuts. The difficulty is the finance teams are under such pressure to get the invoices out on time. They're also relying on other departments to get the right information, that they generally are spending most of their time then in that Excel sheet, making sure it's right, making sure it's correct. And I spoke to an MSP, which just popped in my head, that would be a good example. They'd actually be under the revenue that I mentioned of 600K, but everything was manual. So they couldn't scale where they were at that moment in time, because they had a couple of people full-time just focusing on invoicing. And it's not the most efficient way to spend your time, because nobody wants to do it. Like, imagine, I think people that are listening to this, if you've ever had to file an expense report just for a business trip, which I've had to do obviously before, it's one of my least favorite things to do in the world, and that's nothing compared to what your finance teams are doing, or your billing teams for the MSP. And I think depending on the size of the MSP, higher up the chain don't always see that issue because they're not there on the ground. It depends on the size, obviously, of the company. Some owners are doing the billing and they can see it, like you mentioned yourself. But yeah, try to define your process and talk to your team to identify the gaps and where you can improve. And then once your foundation is there, you can start to think about, what can I do with all of this data that I have?
Yeah.
and make better decisions as a result.
So I must admit, I came into this conversation, Ben, with a preconception that, cloud billing was perhaps a platform and, the automation, it would bring all the billing together. And of course, there's elements of that. But I'm having my eyes opened to just the scope. Billing is fundamental for a managed service provider. We knew that. But hopefully, the people listening will now be getting the ideas that there's so much more to billing and how it can impact customer service, how it can impact revenue, how it can, you've just talked about even a sub 600k, 600,000 pound or dollar or euro MSP, they've got full-time members of staff looking after billing, which is like, that feels like a big overhead. So we've talked about the challenges and how cloud billing can sort of help with that. I want to revisit something you said earlier about the opportunities, because again, it occurs to me that when you really start looking into billing, it can open up opportunities to highlight where you could and should be upselling, upserving a client with different, services and solutions. Tell us a little bit more about that, Ben. What are the growth opportunities around billing?
Well, I think that the most obvious one from an operational point of view would be that instead of spending your time on just getting the invoice out, you actually have time to spend on other areas of the business that you can then just focus on, let's say, your recurring revenue, for example, just to make a simple example. I think the upselling opportunities we mentioned. So once you have the foundation built of your, let's say, of your billing, you can then start to see, let's just say with cloud billing, for example, your data is in one place. I can see exactly what's coming in and what's going out. I can see if my invoices are going out on time. I can build better relationships with my customers. I can manage multiple vendors easier because there's a lot of them. That's internally. I can communicate to my staff, the processes that you don't have to live in Excel, that you can spend your time analyzing this data. I, as the owner of the MSP, can be confident that my numbers are right, so I can use the data that I have to drive strategic decisions, as opposed to putting your finger in the air and hoping for the best, which can happen.
It does absolutely happen. Ben, I was sat with some MSPs last night and we were talking about how the majority of MSPs manage their business based on gut feeling, not on metrics, not on data. When you start managing on data, that's the truth. It's not your gut feeling about a business. Obviously, you've got to go with intuition to a degree, but when you're faced with things in black and white, it can paint a completely different picture, can't it?
It can. And what's interesting about that is I'm relatively new to the MSP world. I was in the finance world before, selling CPM software to companies in different industries, legal, insurance, for example. But finance was the core, and it was about bringing everything into one place. Since the last year and a half or so of entering the MSP world, I've learned a lot more about them. I've learned obviously how they operate, that they're effectively running the economies of the UK and the Benelux, because without them, local businesses aren't going to survive, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, the people that work for MSPs and that start MSPs are extremely passionate about the problems that they solve. Oh, because we've touched on a lot of them that are directly or indirectly related to billing. It's very difficult, and you really need to have a love for it if you want to get into into that industry, I think. And I have to say it's great to see, but the danger with that is they get lost in that problem solving and then forget to zoom out sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's where I think AI and automation is a buzzword, I suppose, at the moment. But I do believe that, particularly with us, automation is really important for an MSP to be able to scale effectively. I find have you noticed, like, it's difficult to retain the right people or attract the right people with the skills shortage that we see in the IT world.
Oh, goodness,
it's not just a problem for MSPs. I think other industries face it as well. And automation in different areas of the business can help mitigate that risk. And one important point to make on that is not to scare people, because automation and AI, people are afraid that that's there to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
for example, which is not what a solution like cloud billing comes in to do. Cloud billing comes in to take away those mundane tasks that you hate to do every month, for example, and then empowers you to spend your time on things you actually can bring value to. So not to say sending invoices is probably the most valuable thing that you can do for the MSP, but you can really start to analyze and do what you're actually brought in to do, as opposed to spending all your time. Yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I've been banging the drum about automation and, to a lesser degree, artificial intelligence and automation, machine learning for many, many years on this show. And it's not about taking people's jobs and making people redundant. It's about freeing up people's time to concentrate on higher value use of their time. And for me, you just hit the nail on the head in terms of, you said billing is fundamentally, it is really, really important to MSPs, but the client doesn't see that as a value add. They just expect it to happen. So if you can free up your staff's time to actually be talking to clients, to be, having conversations with them about how you can help, not only does it increase your revenue with upserving opportunities, but it's much more fun for the people to do as well. So we need to reframe that, don't we?
Yeah, and the happier your employees are, and probably, and maybe even you, if it's you that is involved in the billing run, the better work you will do, the better service you'll deliver. It's like a tap, Richard. If you we all take water for granted, right? And it's quite similar to billing. We don't see it. We don't see the value until something goes wrong and my tap doesn't work in the morning when I need to drink water.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy as well. I'm thinking, just while we were talking there, we've talked about the opportunities for upserving. We've talked about reducing revenue leakage and all of the admin headaches that come with billing and how cloud billing can help there. So I'm thinking there are data compliance, like legislation, security issues to be aware of in the billing space for managed service providers.
Yeah.
So how do you help MSPs to tackle those type of hurdles?
So we would look after the regulatory side of the billing, because it's going to be processed through our platform versus, let's say, somebody that's doing it through Excel, that also sending your invoices in certain ways. It needs to be done in the correct way, for example, to meet standards, GDPR as well. As much as that kind of, we forget about that, how important that is. So we make sure that we obviously comply with all of those regulations. Some of them are slightly different in the EU to the UK, but I think most are pretty similar.
Yeah, that makes sense. And cloud billing, we talked about how it can help MSPs to free up their time to spend more time with clients, to do high value sort of use of their time. But does cloud billing allow you to share some of the insights that the MSP can find from billing directly with their clients?
Yeah, so I suppose we've actually only touched on the internal insights that you can get from cloud billing. We can also offer, for example, customer portals. So we could use, if you wanted to give access to customer an area where they can log in and they can see all of their billing data day to day in real time. That's also possible, because that can also mitigate the risk of support tickets being opened up throughout the month when customers are wondering what their consumption is like, and so on and so forth. And that can be done in different ways. We can do it through our own solution that we have. We can also export the data in a way where, if you want to have it in your own custom systems, that's also possible. And again, it touches on that transparency piece for your customer. So you can choose to show it, you can choose not to show it. That's up to the MSP. I believe it's always better to be as transparent as you can. And we're also moving into, towards the end of the year, we've gone live with a couple of our customers now with kind of data focused solution. So bringing in billing, ESG, financial, operational data, for example, and security data all into one place, where you can then kind of, building on the points that we made earlier. It's the same idea, but bringing everything together, which is something that I personally haven't seen on the market. So I'm excited for that to be released towards the back end of the year.
Yeah, and you've already got it in beta with a couple of clients to prove the concept.
Yeah, and that's probably more. That's giving, let's say, your MSP the ability to just see all the data again in one place, which helps you make better decisions. So that's more on the internal side, but we do both. So it depends.
It all comes back to this thing, something that I was taught very, very early in my managed service career, that what can be measured can be managed. It's an old
Yes.
phrase, but it's a really powerful one, isn't it? It's like, don't manage by gut feeling, manage by metrics, and what can be measured can be managed, because once you've got the data there, it tells you in black and white, and you can start tweaking the levers accordingly with any managed service provider business.
Yes. I think the newer MSPs, the ones that are just up and running and they're trying to grow and get out there, you do have to use your gut to get to a certain point. But when you reach that maturity level where it's time to take the next step, effectively, that's when that really becomes important.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking directly to our listeners now, Ben, if you were to suggest just one thing that MSP should do with their billing, what would it be? So, they're going to come away from this call with lots of ideas around billing, perhaps lots of challenges they hadn't thought about. But what's the one thing that they should do after this call?
Think about how your processes are defined at the moment, because the billing processes that we've touched on during this conversation either directly or indirectly relate to other departments of the business. So if you start to see, just identify where your challenges are, where your team are spending the most time on, and then talk to someone, like talk to someone from cloud billing, talk to someone from a different billing solution, and see if you can get the expertise that will help you solve the challenges. It's ultimately all about solving the MSP's challenge, and if a solution can bring value, then you should have a chat. But first, do it internally. See where the gaps are, and then also think about those questions that we spoke about during this conversation. Is from a billing perspective, are you confident in your numbers? How is your relationship with your customer? Are you able to answer the questions that they ask you? And again, that could be billing, but it could be other parts of the business. So it will help. It all connects. And I've mentioned it maybe 2 or 3 times in this conversation. Standardize your offerings.
Yeah, for me, that's the biggest takeaway from this, Ben. Standardize your offerings, because I learned that. My background was corporate IT, and I learned the value in standardization across technical hardware, across things like that. But it also works for billing, doesn't it?
It's the only way you'll scale. If you ignore it, the problem will only get larger, and it will be more difficult to tackle. You will be able to tackle it, but it's going to take more time and more investment. So yeah, it's always the thing you don't want to do. It's like going to the dentist. I suppose we don't want to do it, but it's necessary, right? We need to do it.
Yeah. So cloud billing, founded in the Netherlands, now expanding into the UK and the Irish markets as well. We've got a global audience for this show, Ben. So can I ask, is there any plans, to go further afield, perhaps into the US, Australia, other parts of the world?
There will be, not in the next year, I would say. The main focus will be the UK and the mainland of Europe. We might see ourselves expand into other territories in the EU. I would say that would be the first step.
Yeah.
Having said, who knows what tomorrow brings?
Who knows where it goes? I've got to say, though, as a Brit, a fellow European, quite often I speak to people on the podcast and their solutions are US based initially, and it's like, yeah, we'll come to Europe eventually. It's really nice to see a success story in Europe that is serving, UK, Ireland, and Europe first, and then looking further afield. I know that's going to ruffle feathers of some of our global listeners here, but there's a little bit of pride in seeing a European solution that's springing up here.
Yes, absolutely. Naturally, it's because I think the American market speaks English. They move to the UK and then to the Netherlands, because we all speak English in the Netherlands generally. So we're doing it slightly differently, but yeah, it's what you got to do.
Your background in tech, tell us what your journey to cloud billing looked like. So you mentioned, you've got a background in finance, but what attracted you to work in managed service space, and how have you found it over the last year?
Yeah, so I started. I've been at a variety of different SaaS roles. I started in an even more exciting, and I say this sarcastically, topic than billing, where we sold SMTP software, which I'm not going to go into. I won't go into in too much detail. My previous role was working for a very large American company, selling CPM software. Really learned about the challenges that finance teams go through, but also touched on a lot of the points of how can I use all of the data that I have to make better decisions. So if you think of that point for a moment, then when I spoke to the founder a year and a half ago of cloud billing, I saw a lot of similar challenges that cloud billing could solve, that the former company I worked for solved. And I noticed the gap in the market because MSPs, again, still 9 out of 10 MSPs that I speak to are doing things manually.
Yeah.
Even the large ones. And it's very rare I find somebody say that they're happy with their billing. So for me as a sales professional, it's important that a solution or company that I work for can bring value to the end customer. So in our case, the MSP world. And the fact that MSPs have such an impact on the world, we don't really realize it. So maybe because I've just come into the industry in the last 1.5, 2 years, that I wasn't fully aware of how much of an impact the MSP has on the local economy. Let's say, for example, my corner store, or even, they're using an MSP is running all of their software more than likely. So you're actually keeping these countries alive. And it's very interesting, and it's constantly changing. So the challenges that are today, that were yesterday, are different tomorrow. Yeah. And yeah, I think that keeps me on my toes at least.
Some people get freaked out by it. Others really thrive upon the constant change. And the thing is, if you're a managed service, change is an absolute constant. So you need to get comfortable with it and embrace it. So yeah, but for me, it's always kept things exciting. So yeah,
I mean, every day is different.
Every day is different. that variety suits some people. It suits me, for instance, but other people, not so much. But I'm glad to hear it suiting you. So
yes,
well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've got to say, Ben, long-time listeners to the show will know I try to do a couple of things here. I try to bring on guests who perhaps explore topics that have not been looked at before. Billing is definitely one of those. So I think we've got a lot of interesting insights and questions coming out of that. But secondly, I like to shine a light on the new players in the market who are positively disrupting the space. And cloud billing are doing absolutely that. So for anybody listening, any MSPs who want to find out more about cloud billing, what's the next step they should take? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can connect with me obviously on LinkedIn. If this is going out on LinkedIn, I'm sure my profile will be there. I'll drop my email to you, Richard, after this, so everybody has that. Our website is cloudbilling.nl. Feel free to reach out to us there as well. But I'm always available. Reach out to me personally. I like to have conversations, even if you're not directly thinking of overhauling your billing or you're not ready for it and you just want to have a conversation. Happy to share insights, because I think the more software vendors, partners, and people in the MSP world can learn from each other, the better. The more we can evolve and grow.
Absolutely. Ben, this has been fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I hope to see you out on the road. Just before we came on air, we were talking about a few events. So I hope we get to say hello in person in the very near future.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll be at the MSS events the upcoming months. There'll be a few more. You have some good ones for me that I might be able to go to as well. Yeah. And also the CompTIA events, I think, are starting again in the coming months.
Oh, well, I'll definitely see you at the CompTIA EMEA conference down in London.
Excellent.
It'll be good to say hello to you in person. So.
Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Ben, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Richard. Cheers. Bye.
Hey folks, Richard here. Thanks for listening today. I know you've got a ton of options for who you listen to nowadays, so I really appreciate your support. Do you have any feedback on this episode? Ideas for future guests? Tweet me at Tublog using the hashtag TubTalk. I respond to every tweet and really appreciate your feedback.